All right. Okay, Genesis chapter 40. Now, we do want to get maybe out of here a little bit early before it gets completely dark out here. I am going to make no promises about getting all the way through this chapter. Probably about halfway through. All right, then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. By the way, this is the only place where Pharaoh is referred to as the king of Egypt. Usually it's just Pharaoh. And by the way, Pharaoh is not a name. Pharaoh is the title that the Egyptians used for their king. So there was always, Pharaoh something. It wasn't that, again, his name is Pharaoh. That's just the way of addressing their king there. But anyway, says Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Now, keep in mind that in those types of cultures, and we see this especially like in our recent study of Nehemiah. What was Nehemiah's job?
Cupbearer.
He was the cupbearer. The cupbearer served two functions, and this was probably true in Egypt as well. The cupbearer was essentially a royal food taster, because, well, what would be one of the best ways to get rid of the king if you wanted to assassinate him? Poisoning. So the cupbearer would always taste the king's food first. The second thing is the cupbearer was a personal attendant to, in this case, Pharaoh, that would always be, within just a few feet away from the king.
His waiter.
He not only poured wine for him and kept the king, or in this case, Pharaoh's cup full, but as I mentioned, anytime that somebody would bring food in, which in this case would be, guess who? The baker. That the cupbearer would be the first one to taste it. So you see here when it says the cupbearer and the baker, these are not two independent, just totally unrelated jobs here. Because if you want to poison the king, what two people do you have to get in on the plot? The baker and the cupbearer. So the fact that these two particular individuals are involved in this and they've offended Pharaoh, that ought to give you an idea as to probably what took place here. Somebody, in all probability, tried to poison Pharaoh. And it more than likely either was the baker, or at least, as I mentioned, the baker had to have been in on it. Now, why did he, as we'll see here in a moment, both of them get thrown into the dungeon? Because from Pharaoh's perspective, he knows that for somebody to successfully poison him, somebody in the kitchen, in this case the baker, and his cupbearer have got to be in on the plot. All right, verse 3.
I'm confused because it would seem to me that if Pharaoh believed they tried to poison him, he would put him to death. He wouldn't just put him in confinement.
Well,
I'm thinking maybe he just got a really bad gastrointestinal 3-day flu thing, and he blamed it on the cupbearer and the baker.
Okay, just chill out a minute. Don't get ahead of yourself. We're going to see. Verse 3 says, so he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was in prison. Who's the captain of the bodyguard?
Potiphar.
Now, this again ought to bring kind of full circle as to why did Potiphar put Joseph in the jail? Because that's Potiphar's apparently the one that he's not the jail keeper, but apparently the dungeon is under Potiphar's authority. So the fact that Joseph is in this particular jail is once again not by accident. Potiphar, as the head of the bodyguard, is the one responsible for these. Now, if somebody tried to poison Pharaoh, who would be the one to execute judgment against them? The head bodyguard, Potiphar. So all of this comes full circle. You got two people involved in serving the Pharaoh and the bodyguard, who, by the way, already has Joseph in his personal dungeon. So Pharaoh gets mad because he thinks probably there's a plot against him. Potiphar steps in and throws these two in his dungeon where Joseph is. Now verse 4 says the captain of the bodyguard, who of course is who?
Potiphar.
Potiphar. Now isn't it interesting that Potiphar, who apparently in the previous chapter is mad enough with Joseph that he throws him in prison, and look who it is that he puts in charge. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them.
He might have been mad at Joseph, but he also knew Joseph was a guy who can get things done.
Uh-huh.
And is good at running things, because he had him running his household.
Which makes you wonder, though, did Potiphar really believe that Joseph did what his wife charged him with, or was Potiphar backed into a corner
And put him into confinement to placate his wife.
to placate his wife?
But didn't really want to hurt Joseph.
So see, if Potiphar really believed that Joseph had done what Joseph was accused of, would he have put Joseph in charge of all this?
No.
Especially these two guys that have now been accused of trying to murder Pharaoh. Said, put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Now, some time, that could mean several days, several weeks. It's a very indescript phrase here that we just really, literally in the original Hebrew, it just says they were there for several days. So it could be a week, could be a few months, but apparently not an inordinate amount of time. But the fact that they weren't there for several years, or probably even not for several months, maybe a few weeks at most, what do you think's going on in the meantime? Potiphar's investigating. Potiphar more than likely at this point is trying to figure out, okay, who actually tried to poison Pharaoh and who's guilty and who's not guilty. Potiphar's probably in the background doing his job. All right, now we get to answering your issue. Verse 5. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. All right, now, of course, how do we know that these dreams actually had an interpretation at this point? I mean, we're talking pagans, people that worship false gods. Why would God give them a dream that would actually tell them what was going to happen?
He used them as his instrument.
Yeah. This wasn't for their benefit. This was for Joseph's benefit. And like Daniel, 1,000 years later, Joseph apparently realized he'd been given a gift, that hearing their dream, now whether God spoke to him or whether it just came to him in a realization, we're never told. But Joseph clearly knew that he was capable of interpreting this, at least as God led him. It says, when Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. And he asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement and notice here, it says, in his master's house. So that is a confirmation once again that Potiphar's the one in charge of this jail. It says, why are your faces so sad today? Then they said to him, we have had a dream and there's no one to interpret it. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. Now, right there when they say, well, we've had this dream. Now, by the way, it was normal in Egyptian, their psychic beliefs and the fact that the Egyptians were known to be heavily into the occult, having dreams and interpreting dreams was actually routine for them. And they had sorcerers, just like the Babylonians, they had sorcerers that supposedly would interpret these dreams. But notice what Joseph said. He didn't say, well, let's consult the sorcerer. He reminds him these dreams belong to God. But this is tell it to me.
Joseph too had a dream from God, or at least one he claimed came from God.
Mm-hmm. Which may have set the stage for this, that Joseph knows that, well, this has happened to me before, so let's see what happens. All right. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. Notice here, once again, we have this theme of threes. You think just the fact that 3 things in groups of, or all of these things in groups of 3 is just totally coincidental?
Didn't Jesus say, I am the vine?
Yeah, actually he does. Anyway, it says on the vine there were 3 branches. And as it was budding, its blossoms came out and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. Now again, how Joseph knew this, we're never told. All we know is that obviously God revealed it to him, but how Joseph knew that this was the correct interpretation, we just don't know. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Now, by the way, this phrase, lift up your head, happens numerous times. It comes from just the vision that if a guy's dejected, what does he normally do?
Head down.
He's got his head down. So it comes from the idea of lifting a person's head up. So he's saying that you don't need to be dejected anymore. Pharaoh's going to restore you to your position. Now, why do you think this would happen at this particular point? It's been several days. He's in the prison. Why do you think
uncovered the facts?
Potiphar has done his investigation and realized the cupbearer had nothing to do with the plot. And so he's probably made his report to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said, well, if my cupbearer had nothing to do with this, bring him back. Verse 14, only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. Notice, he doesn't ask anything about, mention me to Potiphar, because he knows Potiphar's the one to put him in there. He's going over Potiphar's head. He said, mention me directly to Pharaoh, that Pharaoh will get me out of here. What's that?
That he sees every day.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Because as the cupbearer, he is in the personal presence of Pharaoh and about to be put back in that position, because again, if Potiphar's done his job, then Potiphar's probably cleared him and said, well, you weren't involved in the plot, so he gets his job back. Verse 15, for I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon. So he's still claiming his innocence, although by this point he's been there a few years. Now we get to the interesting part. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head, and on the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Then Joseph answered and said, This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. Not quite exactly the interpretation the baker was probably anticipating. Which, of course, this tells you that Potiphar, as you know, if in fact Potiphar during this time is doing the investigating, Potiphar's cleared one of them and decided that the baker was probably guilty. Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday. Now, why would this day be particularly of interest? There was a celebration, and this may have been what the whole plot was about. It could be that the plot to kill Pharaoh might have been designed to occur on Pharaoh's birthday, because if he's the king, and he's Pharaoh, what do you think they would have done on Pharaoh's birthday?
Had all kinds of good treats.
Oh yeah, big celebration. And Pharaoh would have been eating plenty. It says that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants, and restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. By the way, as we'll close there, we do know that it took, from this point, 2 more years for Joseph to get out of prison. But this sets up the scene for what will happen is when the time comes and the cupbearer remembers, oh yeah, there's a guy in the dungeon that can interpret dreams. And that's what we know will ultimately get Joseph out of prison. Questions this evening?
What's the significance of the birds eating the bread out of the basket?
Because the birds would probably pick at his flesh when he's hanging from the tree.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. Kind of what I thought. It wasn't about the birds poisoning the Pharaoh's food or tainting the Pharaoh's food. It was about the birds picking his corpse.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Okay, no other questions? All right, let's sing our closing hymn.